What similarities do you see now between the Epstein case and the cover-up and the Diddy case?
Americans have to really wake up to this, that there are guys in our government like Damian Williams that are pulling strings. And there was William Barr, who is a nasty piece of work. He was the attorney general that covered up the Franklin scandal, which I wrote about. And he also oversaw the Epstein grand jury, Maxwell grand jury, and covered that up. So you've got these dirty, one's an attorney general and one's a U.S. attorney. You've got these really dirty guys in pivotal positions that are able to cover this up.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. And as always, my friends, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. Fires are still raging here. Man, I just hope that this is the end of it. The winds have died down a little bit, and hopefully they're going to get it under control. But it's amazing how this thing has been spreading. You know, all of a sudden we wake up and it's popped up. It's in a different area. It's unbelievable. It's so devastating. The worst fire in the history of Los Angeles. And I did my rant about it on my live. I'm not going to get into that now. We have another subject equally as disturbing, I should say, and that is human trafficking. We're going to talk about Diddy. We're going to talk about Epstein. We're going to talk about another scandal, the Franklin scandal, with my very special guest, Nick Bryant. But people, before I get into Nick and bring him in, I got to tell you something. This is it's just too disgusting. It's unbelievable what's going on with human trafficking and pedophilia happening at the highest levels. And you're going to hear how it's been covered up with Epstein. It's probably going to be covered up with Diddy, because we had similar people involved in both of these prosecutions, and names have been hidden at this point in time. You know, Trump said that he's going to release the whole list. I don't know what more that's going to do. It's not a question of releasing a list. It's a question of holding these people accountable for their actions, because what they've done is absolutely disgusting. It really is. Human trafficking, you know, pedophilia, human trafficking of minor children. And that's what we're talking about here in the Epstein case and the Diddy case, in this Franklin scandal that I'm going to talk about, that Nick Bryant investigated very thoroughly, wrote a book about it. It's called the Franklin scandal. And what it's about human trafficking, the trafficking of minor children. And when I say minor, there are children, minor children. It started in Nebraska in a credit union. And it was all over the country, right into Washington, D.C., politicians involved, wealthy people involved, and it's been covered up. And Nick Bryant, my guest, who's a journalist and a tremendous researcher, investigative reporter, he is committed, okay, to revealing this human trafficking issue with minor children, human trafficking, period, but with minors, even more disgusting. I want to read something about my guest. And, you know, I take this personal, people. You know why I take it personal? I know the resources that the Department of Justice has. I know the resources that the FBI has. How do I know? Because they came after me. They came after organized crime with a vengeance when they wanted to stamp it out. They used the RICO Act so effectively to stamp it out. And they did. They took a harrowing blow to us. They could do the same thing if they really cared about the human trafficking issue. The same thing. But they don't care about it because they're involved in it. Politicians are involved in it. Wealthy people involved in it. We've seen that in the Epstein case. We're seeing it in the Diddy case. And we know about it in this Franklin scandal thanks to Nick Bryant's work. And it's just terrible. And yeah, I know that they can get rid of it, but what is with these people that are into pedophilia at the highest levels of our government? What is it with them? What is this sickness? It's just disgusting. I want to read about my guest, and man, I hope that he continues his work and that we as a community, as a society, really become aware of this and demand answers and demand accountability. This cover-up stuff has got to stop. You know, our government is absolutely corrupt at this point. What we've seen going on in every area, from the fires in California that we were totally unprepared to handle, thanks to our governor and the mayor of Los Angeles, to what's happening at the southern border, to the corruption that's going on in our cities and our states, it's unbelievable, and it's got to stop. It has got to stop because it affects us. It affects you and me and our children and our grandchildren, our communities. It's got to stop. And the only way you stop that is by holding people accountable. That's it. Not by talking about it. The press, they should be ashamed of themselves. Why are they not jumping off their seats talking about human trafficking of minor children? Why do they stay silent when it comes to transgender, surgery in children, which is mutilation? Why don't they jump out of their seats and talk about it? Why don't they want to report it? Why not? Because it fits their progressive agenda to keep quiet? It's disgusting. They should be ashamed of themselves, because there's nothing more disgusting in life than taking advantage of young children, sexually or any other way. It's terrible. Let me read. I know people, I get emotional about this, but I can't help it. I'm a father of 7. I have 7 grandchildren. I just cannot, I don't understand it. I can't fathom taking advantage of minor children. If you're an adult, if you're a person in power, you're a person in authority, how do you do this? How do you look in the mirror and do this? I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm sorry. Look, I understand, being attracted to women, of course. Guys do that all the time. I mean, that's what it's about. But being attracted to children, abusing children, pedophilia, taking advantage of minors, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. We have to hold these people accountable. Let me read about my guest. His name, again, is Nick Bryant. He wrote this book, The Franklin Scandal. Not to be redundant, I said it before, but he's written this book, and it was about a scandal of human trafficking, pedophilia, taking advantage of minor children sexually and every other way, okay? And it ran from Nebraska all the way up to Washington, D.C. And yes, there were politicians involved and people at the highest levels of government and also of corporate America. Let me read this. This is part of the book. Listen. As the Franklin scandal unfolded, allegations pointed towards a covert network of powerful figures who were purportedly involved in child exploitation and abuse, same as Diddy, same as Epstein. These were not just men of local influence, but individuals with national and even international connections, people at the highest level of government. The names implicated included some of the country's elite, senators, CEOs, and other key political operatives. The network purportedly extended into the highest offices of government, suggesting a level of complicity that was deeply disturbing. You want to go after organized crime for gambling? You want to go after organized crime for shaking down, a real estate developer? Okay. And you want to ignore this? You want to go after organized crime for running a numbers business, for putting money out on the street for 1%? Okay. But why do you ignore this? Why do you ignore this? Human trafficking of children, pedophilia. Why do you ignore this? Because you're complicit in it. That's why you're involved in it. That's why. Let me continue. The scandal's cover-up efforts appear to be as intricate as the wrongdoing itself, same as in Epstein and Diddy. Evidence suggested systematic efforts to bury the truth, discredit witnesses, and intimidate investigators. You don't think they did that in the Epstein case? Why does just Maxwell, she got 20 years in a cushiony place. You know why? I'm telling you why. They probably went there and said, hey, you saw what happened to Epstein. We got rid of him. Keep your mouth shut because you were his right-hand person. We'll give you 20 years. Sounds good to the public. We'll put you in a cushiony place, and maybe you'll be able to enjoy the rest of your life. That's why. Where are the other people that were involved in Epstein? How come nobody else is indicted? Where were the people that helped him procure these young kids? What about all these lawsuits? How come people didn't put them in front of a grand jury and use them? You know that Epstein is indicted under the RICO statute? Only him, one person. RICO is a criminal organization. These are questions that Nick Bryant's going to answer. Key files and documents vanished or were mysteriously destroyed. Happens in Epstein too. It's going to happen in Diddy also. Witnesses recanted their statements under duress, and some even alleged threats to their personal safety. Witnesses were intimidated. Same thing with Epstein. Same thing with Diddy, guaranteed. Mark my words, going to happen. I can smell this, I can see it, and so can many of you. You don't have to be an expert to know this. I may have a little bit more insight because I was involved with the government. I know what they can do. Let me continue. One of the most notable aspects was the involvement of the media and law enforcement. Yes, involvement. They're complicit in this too by keeping their mouths shut. who were either complicit in the cover-up or hamstrung by the sheer power of the individuals involved. Reports that should have sparked wider investigations often stalled or were quashed altogether. That's what happened with Epstein. That's why nobody else is indicted other than Maxwell. Where are the people that aided and abetted him for 20 years? The influence extended into law enforcement agencies themselves, raising concerns about the integrity of the investigation. High-ranking officials within the FBI and local police departments were rumored to have played a role in stifling the progress of the investigation. Grand juries came to perplexingly inclusive results despite substantial evidence being presented. In some cases, they indicted they indicted, low-level employees, but overlooked the alleged misconduct of more prominent figures. People, there is a systemic pattern of corruption at every level of our government. We people, my viewers and people across America, have put Trump into office for one reason, I believe, to stop the corruption. Now, under that corruption, we have unsealed borders, we have crime going rampant, we have a lot of stuff going on, but basically it could be all under one heading, and that's corruption. And that's what's going on at the highest level. And to stoop to the level of being involved in human trafficking of young minor children, some as young as 10 years old. 10 years old. Those were allegations in the Epstein and the Diddy case. And people are covering it up. And they're complicit in it. And the media keeps their mouths shut. They'd rather go after Trump for some BS thing that happened in a hotel room in 2006. A payoff to an alleged prostitute that Trump denies. There's no real evidence to show that. In the Diddy case, there's evidence. There's videos. He blackmailed people. So did Epstein. Where are these files? Where are the videos? Why are we not seeing them? We want to know who's involved in this. Because those videos will show who visited the Epstein mansion and who visited Diddy's freak-offs. And I hope Trump gets it out there. I don't think he will. I think the cover-up goes too high. I don't even think he's going to get it done. But I want him to. I really want him to, because the government is involved in this. Okay. I can go crazy, people. I can talk about it without even bringing my guest on, but I don't want to do that because he's too important. I believe he's very credible. He's done his work. He's an investigative journalist. He didn't let anybody shut him down. He's going to tell you his story. And by the way, he wrote a tremendous article, which I'll get into at another time, another topic, about queso and a big cover-up with the mob cops. We're going to get into that at some point, not now. With no further delay, let me bring my guest on, Nick Bryant. Well, Nick, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm fascinated by some of the interviews that I've seen you with others, and obviously the book, The Franklin Scandal. I've got into that a little bit, and your knowledge of what went on in the Epstein case and what now is occurring in the Diddy case. I think it's fascinating. What I love about you, you tell the truth. You're an investigative journalist, and you really put your heart and soul into these things. And, you know, I think one of the most despicable things that we're dealing with today is human trafficking, pedophilia, and it's happening at the highest levels. I think we all know that. And I'm one of those guys that want to see it exposed in a big way. And any way that I can aid or help in that to get the truth out, I'm for it. And I think a lot of people agree with that. So, you know, the first thing I want to ask you, I want to go back to the Franklin scandal a little bit because my viewers probably are not aware of that. But if you can just get into that a little bit, kind of summarize it, tell us how you got involved, how you started investigating that, and what it's all about.
The book is entitled The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And I'm a New York-based freelance journalist, and I was pitching some articles to an editor one day, and he said, pitch me some dark articles. So I pitched him some dark articles, and ultimately what happened after that was I got a customs report on the finders. And this customs report is so mind-boggling that we put the entire report in the book. It's about a cult out of DC, and two of the finders were in a Tallahassee park, and they were busted with 6 kids. And the kids looked like ragamuffins, and some concerned citizens called the Tallahassee police on on the finders and the 6 kids. And then the police showed up and they immediately arrested the 2 finders, and then the 6 kids were put in protective custody. And there was child pornography found in the van. So the U.S. Customs got involved. And a search warrant was executed on the finder's warehouse. And the Tallahassee police and also the customs agents found horrific stuff there. I mean, really horrific stuff, like child pornography. And actually, there was a telex about the finders buying a couple of children. Now, I know this sounds mind-boggling, but it's right there in the U.S. Customs report.
My friends, during my time on the street, I met a lot of sophisticated criminals. I met a lot of scammers. As a matter of fact, those of you that know my background, you can probably put me in that category, and you'd be correct. But there's a scam going on now that's really sophisticated, and it's really kind of frightening if you own a home. And did you know that American homeowners nationwide, that's all over the country, they have over $32 trillion in equity. That's a lot of value. That's a big asset. And today, there are sophisticated criminals. They're called cyber criminals, and they're targeting the equity in your house. It's a growing scam. The FBI is calling it house stealing. I never heard of that on the street. I heard of burglary, I heard of break-ins, I never heard of house stealing. But this is what it's all about. And house alarms, doorbell cameras, deadbolts, they don't work against these thieves because they're not after your stuff. They don't care what you have in the house. They're not looking to rob you. They're after your home's equity. And if your title isn't being constantly monitored, these scammers can actually transfer the title of your home into their own name. Yes, they can do that. And they use a simple one-page document that they file at the county clerk's office. And then after they have the title in their name, they go out and take loans against your house. They use your house as collateral for their loans. Of course, they don't pay the loans back. They don't have to. And you know what's even worse? They can even sell the property behind your back. And you don't know any of this is going on until what happens? You get a notice in the mailbox. They start arriving in your mailbox. By then, damage has been done. You're left with a financial and a legal nightmare. And you know what? The banks are not going to help you. They have your house as collateral. They want to collect their money. That's it. And if you sell the property, the people that are buying it from you, you're going to have a headache. It's going to be a legal nightmare. So what do? I'm going to give you the advice. The best way to protect yourself and protect your equity is with triple lock protection from my friend at Home Title Lock. Now, triple lock protection is a 24/7 monitoring of your title. They alert you if there's any changes in the title, and God forbid, if the worst thing happens and something goes down with your house with a loan, or God forbid they try to sell it, they'll restore your services at no out-of-pocket cost to you. How can you beat that? So let me ask you this, when was the last time you checked on your title? If you're like me, the answer is probably never. I don't remember checking on my title. Why would you? Unless you're taking out a loan or you're going to sell a house, you don't do that. And that's exactly what these scammers are counting on. They figure you're not going to look at your title. They have all this time to do all of this work, and you're not even going to know about it. So here's what you got to do. You can protect your home title today and make sure you're not already a victim. You can get a free title history report, a 30-day free trial of triple lock protection today. All you need to do is go to HometitleLock.com and use my promo code MF30, or you can click on the link in the description. Once again, that's HometitleLock.com, promo code MF30. People, you own a house, you got to protect your equity. It's for you, it's for your family. You can't afford to wait. So do that today. And my friends, if I ever gave you an offer you shouldn't refuse, this is one of them.
So they thought that they had really tracked down some very malevolent players that were doing very bad things with kids. And Ramon Martinez was the U.S. Customs officer that wrote the report. And they had this tremendous cache of illicit stuff that they got from the search warrant. And nothing was happening after 2 or 3 days. There was just radio silence. So Ramon Martinez went to the DC police and he said, what's going on with this case? And the DC police said, well, it's become a CIA internal matter and there'll be no more investigation on it. And I read that customs report, which I did authenticate, and it blew my mind because I'd been in academia, and I kind of knew what the good guys did, and I kind of knew what the bad guys did, and I thought I had a pretty good grasp of it. But that customs report, really, I did not have a paradigm to look at that customs report. It made no sense to me whatsoever. Why is the CIA interrupting investigation into this? So that opened up my mind, and I was trolling the internet, and I came across something that was kind of similar in Omaha, Nebraska, but there was so much innuendo. I just decided that I had to go there and investigate it. And I went there pretty skeptical. It was The innuendo on the internet was that it was a nationwide trafficking network that was plundering Boys Town, that was involved with blackmail, and it pandered to a lot of politicians. And I went there fairly skeptical. I thought something had gone down in Omaha, but I didn't think that it went down any other place other than Omaha. And then when I got there and I started talking to people, first of all, this was in 2002, and people were terrified to talk about it. It was like I was doing an expose on the KGB and Stalinist Russia. I mean, I was saying, is this America? And I eventually got to one of the victims, and then I was able to get to one of the blackmail photographers. I spent some time there, and I talked to one of the senators that had tried to expose it. And what they described to me was this huge network that did in fact have intelligence connections, and I was able to get a lot of documentation. There were two grand juries in Nebraska that were used to cover it up, and I managed to get the sealed testimony and exhibits of one of the grand juries. So I was able to. I had like 200 flight receipts, and the majority of them went to Washington D.C. And most of the kids, or a lot of the kids that I talked to, were flown to Washington D.C. And in Washington, D.C., there was a party house that was owned by a CIA asset named Craig Spence, and it was right for audiovisual blackmail, much like we see with Epstein and much like we see with Diddy.
So let me just stop you for a minute.
Go ahead.
Let me stop you for a minute. So Nick, this was a human trafficking ring, mostly involving young girls.
No, it was young girls and young boys.
Young girls and boys.
And mostly minors, almost exclusively minors.
And there were politicians and wealthy people, people at the highest level that were involved in this human trafficking organization, whatever you want to call it, at some point in time. And they got involved, and eventually when things started to come to light, it was the CIA and other organizations that came in to try to quiet it down or cover it up.
With the finders, the CIA covered it up. The Franklin network was different than the Finders network. The Finders network was mostly in D.C. The Franklin network was the network that was centered in Nebraska that flew kids to Washington, D.C. And what happened there was a Senate subcommittee that was investigating that. And that basically there was a credit union called the Franklin Credit Union. That's how the book got its name. That was a front for this nationwide network. And Nebraska senators started to investigate because the guy who ran the credit union embezzled $40 million. And the credit union hadn't been audited in 4 years. And federally insured credit unions have to be audited every 4 years. So these senators just looked at the financial crimes initially. But then a number of social service employees came to them, or social service personnel came to them and said, we've been hearing stories that Lawrence King of Omaha has been trafficking children for years. And actually, there have been reports on King trafficking children.
So, Kevin, who would have stopped the auditing of the credit union? How did that stop? If it's supposed to be, every year, why was that not done? Did somebody intervene?
Yeah, it was obvious. I mean, the same thing happened with the initial reports of the child trafficking, because there were reports both from social services and from Boys Town about Lawrence King plundering those kids and flying them around. But those reports got quashed. They were quashed by the Department of Justice and also the FBI and local law enforcement too. And when I realized what had happened, I just said, I've got to, I have to write about this. I have to try to uncover this. And I took a lot of heat. The first time I was there, I took a lot of heat. I was followed, and actually, the last night I was there was a death threat dispensed to me. So I kind of, at that point, when you get death threats, you realize you're on the right path. A lot of people would react differently than I did, but I felt to myself when I left Nebraska that time, I thought, this is just so evil that these kids are being trafficked and molested with impunity. And then the Department of Justice and the FBI is covering it up. That I'm gonna write a book about this. Well, I initially thought I could write an article about it, and then I'd write a book. But I said I've got to do something about this. It's just, this is not the America that I grew up in. The Department of Justice and the FBI should not be covering up child sex trafficking.
And on whose behalf were they covering up? Or did you have any? Could you list any of the politicians, any of the people that were involved in this? Who are they covering up for?
There was a number of people. It was covered up at the apex of the government, and it was covered up by William Barr. He was the Attorney General under
Really?
And he was also the Attorney General under Trump that covered up Epstein. So these players keep recycling themselves. And one of the politicians who, and I've got this from a pretty good source, one of the politicians that was pandered to was the Attorney General, Richard Thornburgh. So it went all the way up the food chain, and it had to be covered up at all costs. With Epstein, we're seeing the exact same thing. And also with Diddy, that Epstein was protected. And there was one of the girls, one of the Epstein victims, the first one that came forward was 15 years old. And she told her parents that she'd been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And her parents took her to the Palm Beach Police Department. And the Palm Beach Police just looked upon Epstein as this benevolent billionaire. And they were skeptical, but the girl talked about the inside of his home, described the inside of his home, actually described his anatomy. So the Palm Beach Police Department started a year-long investigation, and they were able to get 5 underage girls to come forward, and they got corroborating statements from 12 other people, but they knew of 17 additional underage girls that had been molested. And the Palm Beach Police Department served a search warrant on Epstein and immediately wanted to charge him with 5 counts of child abuse. But what happened was the case got taken away from them by the state of Florida. The Florida attorney, Barry Kirshner, and that was ultimately funneled into a grand jury. And I don't know if your listeners and viewers are familiar with how grand juries work, but grand juries are notoriously easy to corrupt because a special prosecutor is chosen, and he's the one that shows the evidence to the grand jurors, who are just normal citizens that have shown up for grand jury duty. And if he wants, he calls the witnesses and he shows them the exhibits. And there was actually a New York Supreme Court judge that said special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich.
Yes, and I certainly know that to be true, Nick. That's for sure.
That you would. And with the Franklin trafficking network, none of the perps were indicted. Actually, 2 kids were indicted who refused to recant. And with the Epstein trafficking network, I've got the transcripts of that grand jury, and there were 2 witnesses that were called. One was 18 at the time, and one was 16. And the one that was 16 had been molested when she was 14. And then the one that was 18 had been molested when she was 16. And the prosecutor is calling them prostitutes. These girls, you've got a 16-year-old girl who's very fragile, who went through this nightmare of being molested by Jeffrey Epstein, and the prosecutor is referring to them as prostitutes.
So what happened there, Nick, somebody from the top gave this prosecutor marching orders, and how to present this matter to the grand jury. And therefore, was there ever an indictment? Did he get indicted on this?
What happened there was Epstein was indicted on one count of adult pandering, and that was it. But the Palm Beach Police Department, they had the 5 witnesses, only 2 of whom were called, but then they knew of 17 others. So they knew of 22 victims, underage victims of Epstein. And Michael Ryder, who is really one of the heroes in this story, he was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department, and he took a lot of heat. He was followed, dead animals on his doorstep, the kind of stuff that evil people do. And he made so much racket about this. I mean, he became quite vociferous. He said this was one of the biggest breakdowns of justice that has happened in modern times. So the Justice Department said, well, we'll intervene and we'll prosecute the perpetrators. And Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And at that point, they had 34 victims. The feds were aware of 34 victims. And Alexander Acosta said, and he's never denied this, he said that he was told to stand down because Epstein was intelligence and it was above his pay grade. That's almost like an exact quote. And when you get into that type of power, there's very few people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general.
When you say intelligence, were they implying that Epstein, and probably falsely so, Epstein had something to do with the CIA? He was an operative in some way?
Yes, there is a very dark corner of our intelligence that is involved in blackmail. I've written 3 books about it at this point. And political blackmail isn't something that's new. I mean, political blackmail has been around forever. We think of the founding fathers as saint-like, and there's been hagiographies written about them. But Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a married 23-year-old woman, and he was being blackmailed by her husband. And then a muckraking journalist found out about it, and he outed Alexander Hamilton. And Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton really had a tremendous amount of antipathy towards each other. So the muckraking journalist went to Jefferson and said, I just outed Hamilton, and Jefferson had become president, and he wanted a position in Jefferson's administration. And Jefferson wouldn't do it, so he outed Jefferson as having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and actually DNA has shown that.
I remember that, yeah.
So political blackmail is not new. J. Edgar Hoover was doing it. It's pretty well known that J. Edgar Hoover was doing it. But yes, there is a dark, malignant corner of our intelligence. It's KGB, Compromat. The KGB was obviously notorious for it, but people are naive when they think that our intelligence services wouldn't do that. And
well, let me ask you this. So is it possible, Nick, because we know that we have videotapes, or I don't say we have them, but they have videotapes in Epstein's mansion, and a number of people that were engaging in this child trafficking and engaging in sexual activity were high-level people, and he's got them on video. Is it possible, in your opinion, that this dark side of our intelligence agency might have had Epstein doing this so they can have blackmail situations over some of these people?
Absolutely. I've got no doubts about it. The thing about it is, Jeffrey Epstein, and this is what people don't get about it, Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from Coney Island, from a working class family of Coney Island. And I put his black book on the internet. So, and I got his black book in 2012. So I've done a lot of spelunking into Epstein. And Epstein was, some of the more powerful people in the country were being blackmailed by Epstein. But here's what people miss is there's no way, like Les Wexner was definitely being blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. And Les Wexner is a billionaire. And actually in 1987, he gave Epstein the keys to his kingdom, power of attorney over his billions. And Wexner was heavily hooked up to the Genovese crime family. And a guy named Frank Walsh, who had a trucking company, did a lot of the hauling for Wexner's various clothing lines. And he was definitely a Genovese guy. And
so are you saying too, let me stop you here, that Epstein made a lot of his money through blackmailing wealthy people?
He did, but he was protected, because Jeffrey Epstein by himself couldn't blackmail someone like Les Wexner, who has connections to the Genovese crime family. Who's ever the blackmail mark has to know, if you touch Jeffrey Epstein, there's going to be retribution.
Exactly.
That's the only way that Jeffrey Epstein could blackmail some of the most powerful people in, not only in the country, but in the world.
No, I totally see that. You know, I didn't think that far into this, that he could have been, you know, a CIA operative, if you want to call him that, being used by the CIA to blackmail politicians and powerful people. You know, and those people were, you know, what is it with these people in power that are into pedophilia and into sex with minors? What is, Nick, I don't understand that. What is going on here?
Well, pedophilia exists in all social strata. I mean, as we're talking right now, there are kids being molested in trailer courts. I'm pretty sure of that, or trailer parks. But the thing that differentiates the people that we're talking about is they molest kids with impunity. And I'll give you an example. I finally got to a blackmail photographer for the Franklin Network. There were a couple of blackmail photographers that I knew about, but I actually got one to talk to me. And I was trying to get my mind around it all. And I said, well, you know, how does this work? And he was an unctuous guy, and not the paragon of veracity, but I do believe some of the things that he said. And I said, how does this work? And he goes, if you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on that yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So there's zero incentive. Once someone is compromised that way, there's zero incentive for them to come forward and say, I'm compromised. It's just not going to happen.
And let me ask you this too, they can get to the victims and somehow either buy them off or, you know, keep them silent in such a way, because again, they're people, they're money people, and they're people with power. So I would assume that a lot of that had to happen with Epstein. They had to buy these witnesses.
We're talking about very damaged young girls. One thing, you know, the media has been completely malfeasant with the Epstein investigation. The media just has dug up salacious dirt. No one's called for any kind of justice with Epstein. But the thing about Epstein is human traffickers are vicious, vicious people. And regardless if they're Epstein or they're down the lower socioeconomic rung, human traffickers are vicious, vicious people. And a lot of these girls, and I've talked to a number of them, a lot of them are afraid of, we're not just talking Jeffrey Epstein, we're talking some of the most powerful people in the world. And there was a Epstein Victims Compensation Fund that was set up, and 225 victims came forward, and settlements were awarded to 150, and 8 declined. So, but Jeffrey Epstein trafficked underage girls for 25 years.
Did these victims that got paid off, did they have to sign NDAs? They couldn't talk about anything? They did, right?
Yeah, and that's really a horrible thing, is that because victims of abuse, they get better by talking about it, by telling their truth. But if you got a settlement from that, from the Victims Compensation Fund, you signed a paper saying that you couldn't sue anybody else. And that's a real travesty. And we don't even know really what the criteria was for getting a settlement. And I've been writing about child trafficking, or researching and writing about child trafficking for about 22 years. And I've spoken at a lot of conferences. I mean, very big conferences. And I've gotten to know a number of psychologists, psychiatrists that work with trafficking victims. And I know two therapists, and one's really an eminent psychologist. And she was counseling her patient. She believes that her patient was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And I know another therapist who says that too. Now, both those young women now applied for compensation from the Victims' Compensation Fund, but they were denied. And both those therapists think that the reason why they were denied is because the cover story with Epstein is that the youngest was 14 years old. And that is, and the government and media have been kind of inflexible about that. Although there's indications that there's articles that there were much younger girls than 14. There's one article that came out of the Virgin Islands where some of them were as young as 11 years old.
11 years old. This is, you know, Nick, what gets me about this, whatever you're saying is so true, because here's the deal. I know the power that the Department of Justice and the FBI has. When they wanted to eliminate organized crime in this country, they came out with us in New York. They came after us with a vengeance. With a vengeance, believe me. They're very capable. They have the resources. They have the money. They have the strength behind them. And they turn a blind eye to human trafficking. I mean, we have 300,000 kids now that have come across the border that are lost. That's human trafficking. We don't know where they are. The government doesn't care about it. They turn a blind eye to it. They don't make a big deal. They don't even want to talk about it. The media doesn't want to talk about it. What is going on? Is this just sick, demented people that we have in the highest levels of government?
It's truly unfortunate. I'll give you some numbers that really show you the degree of the problem. Now, I'm talking CDC numbers, and many experts in the field think that it's higher than the CDC numbers, but the CDC numbers are nonetheless daunting. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of American women were molested as minors, and 6% of American boys. And most people in the field will say it's much, much higher for boys, and it's even higher for girls. But that right there is over 50 million Americans have been molested as minors. So this is an endemic problem in our society. And I actually started an organization called Epstein Justice. And what we want is we're vying for a commission and we want two things, relatively simple things. We want to know why the government covered up child trafficking with Jeffrey Epstein. And we know who a bunch of the perpetrators are. We want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. Two simple things. We want to know why the government, as you know, when you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So the government in the Epstein case, and I think in the Diddy case also, is guilty of aiding and abetting child trafficking. And there are all these perps running around, and those perps aren't going to stop. I mean, that's the thing about pedophiles, is they don't stop. So, and we know who a number of them are. The names of a number of the Epstein perpetrators have come out, and the names of a number of the Diddy perpetrators have come out. And
well, let me ask you this with respect to the Epstein case, and I don't know, this is stuff that we're hearing publicly. Trump said he's going to reveal the entire list of all the people that were involved with this Epstein matter. Is that going to do anything if he releases a list? What does that mean?
I personally don't believe that there's a list. I think it's apocryphal. I put the Black Book on the internet, and the Black Book has most of the perpetrators. It has other people that aren't perpetrators. But what we need is the FBI drilled Epstein's safe. after he was arrested, and they took out anywhere from hundreds to thousands of DVDs.
Right.
And that's what we need. We need those reports.
Do you think
And
they still exist, or they destroyed them?
I don't know. I tried to get them through Freedom of Information Act. After Epstein killed himself, they said that the case was closed. So I did a Freedom of Information Act, not on the DVDs, but on reports on the DVDs. And then the FBI got back to me and said that the case was ongoing. So 6 months later, same thing. I didn't want the DVDs. I FOIA'd a report on the DVDs, and then I was told that it was ongoing. So obviously, they're not going to listen to me. But there's enough evidence out there. The New York Times named 6 of the procurers in Jeffrey Epstein's network. And it would be like the New York Times naming 6 guys that were involved with John Gotti. I mean, the feds would jump on him in a heartbeat. And some of the perps even admitted, or some of these procurers even admitted that they were procuring young girls for Jeffrey Epstein. And nothing happened to them. And Maxwell was indicted on a number of conspiracies, as Diddy has been indicted on a racketeering conspiracy, but no one else has been indicted. So, I mean, why has Maxwell been indicted on a conspiracy and no one else has been indicted?
Let me ask you this, Nick. Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself?
I mean, there were a lot of anomalies that night. The security guards were sleeping, or the guards were sleeping. The Epstein's cellmate had been taken out. The cameras were down. But I've tried not to focus on whether or not Epstein killed himself. I think that's kind of a red herring. What we need to focus on is justice for these victims. And I think that, I mean, you could certainly make an argument that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, but I try to avoid that because my purpose is to make sure that there's ultimate justice for Epstein's victims.
Well, here's the thing with that. I spent a lot of time in the same lockdown that Jeffrey Epstein was in. In my opinion, and in my experience, there's no way he could have committed suicide.
Exactly.
No way. And I'll take that to my grave 100%. And I think others that have been in that same situation have said the same thing. And based upon what you're telling me now, if he could have been a CIA operative that had all of this, blackmail matters, I mean, they had to get to him, eliminate him, because, his ticket out is, hey, I can spill the beans on everybody, So either they had to make a deal with him, hey, we'll give you a couple of years, keep your mouth shut, you'll come out and everything will be okay, or they had to eliminate him. And if they had any fear whatsoever that he was going to really talk, then they had to get rid of him, in my view.
I believe that Epstein, in the Franklin scandal, there was 2 primary perps and pimps. One was Craig Spence. And then also with the Epstein scandal, these guys, Spence started to get a lot of media attention, and Epstein started to get a lot of media attention. And you cannot be a blackmail artist if people know that you're a blackmail artist. So that's why I believe that Spence and then Epstein was taken down. And I think Epstein probably had gotten a little too used to the high life. And I don't think that he was going to keep his mouth shut. I'm sure that there was a conversation with Maxwell, and she was told, well, you can keep your mouth shut and you'll do 20 years. She's in a dormitory now. I mean, she was quickly moved into a dormitory, so she's basically in Club Fed. But she kept her mouth shut. I mean, she saw what happened to Epstein. She kept her mouth shut, and then she got 20 years. But and that's another travesty with this. Maxwell helped Epstein traffic these young girls for 25 years, and Maxwell trafficked scores of underage girls, and she was only indicted on one count of child trafficking.
And didn't I read somewhere, Nick, I read something that in a report, or something that you wrote rather, where Maxwell called these girls trash, these young girls trash. That's that's the regard that she and Epstein had for these young girls, trash.
Human traffickers are that way. Human traffickers are vicious people, and they just look at they just looked at these young girls as commodities. I mean, that was it. And that's what's so frustrating for me about this is that here we have, we have this endemic child abuse problem in this country. We're up to 50 million, or over 50 million Americans have been molested as minors. And then child trafficking is huge. And actually 85% of, according to, I mean, it's tough to know, but according to the research that I've read, 85% of the kids that are trafficked in America are American kids. So people think that like they're Mexican kids or they're from Eastern Europe, but no, most of them are American children. And for us to tackle this problem, we have to make sure that the government isn't aiding and abetting child trafficking. I mean, that has to be like one of our primary objectives. And then we can start tackling the problem. We're never going to be able to eradicate child sexual abuse, but we can certainly minimize it.
Well, let me ask you this. What similarities do you see now between the Epstein case and the cover-up and the Diddy case? Are some of the same people involved, some of the same players? In my view, they would have to be. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a U.S. attorney that covered up the Epstein case, and he covered up the P Diddy case. I'll explain it to you. Andre Damian Williams Jr. was a U.S. attorney for the Southern District, and as you probably know, this U.S. attorneys for the Southern District probably have more Jews than just about anybody in federal law enforcement in New York.
Yeah, they're the most powerful prosecutors in the country, no doubt. Like Giuliani, one of them, and all those, without a doubt.
So Damian Williams oversaw the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and there were 4 the victims that were called, and those 4 had only been molested by either Maxwell and or Epstein. They didn't know about the bigger picture of these other power brokers. And that's how Damian Williams did the damage control on the Epstein Maxwell case, is making sure that the witnesses that were called to testify against Maxwell didn't have knowledge of any of the other abominations that were going on. And then he oversaw the Diddy grand jury. And the thing with Diddy is he was starting to get too much press also, because there were a number of, last March, there were 8 lawsuits that were filed against him. Now there's many, many more. But Diddy is indicted. Well, he's got 3 indictments, but one of them is a racketeering indictment, and he's the only one indicted. So
how could you, Nick? Wait a minute. How can you have a racketeering indictment with only one person when you're supposed to be part of a criminal enterprise? And how could that be?
He was RICO'd, and yes, there's only one. He's the only one that was RICO'd. So, I mean, it's the same thing with Epstein and Maxwell. And Americans have to really wake up to this, that there are guys in our government like Damian Williams that are pulling strings. And there was, I talked about it earlier, William Barr, who turned out to be, who is a nasty piece of work. He was the attorney general that covered up the Franklin scandal, which I wrote about. And he also oversaw the Epstein grand jury, Maxwell grand jury, and covered that up. So you've got these dirty, one's an attorney general and one's a U.S. attorney. You've got these really dirty guys in pivotal positions that are able to cover this up.
Unbelievable. So where do you think the Diddy investigation is going to go? What's your, based upon your knowledge, experience, and your investigations, where do you think it's going to go? Going to follow the same pattern as Epstein?
Yeah, it's looking that way. I'm sure that Diddy has had the talk, and the talk is, you know, you could do a lot of damage, but things are going to end up so well for you. So if you shut up and keep your mouth shut, we'll give you 20 years. But the thing about, and what's really troubling about the Diddy case is there were initially 8 lawsuits. Now there's more. There's a attorney in Houston named Tony Busby that's kind of cranking up lawsuits. But the thing about Epstein and Diddy is Diddy was also had hidden cameras, and there were hidden cameras in all of his homes. And I can't. And what kind of struck me as perplexing is usually the FBI served search warrants for human trafficking. It was Homeland Security that served the search warrant on Diddy. And the search warrants were served in Los Angeles and also Miami, but they emanated from the Southern District. So Damian Williams had his paws on the search warrant, just make sure that that they did damage control. And Damian Williams is really, really dirty in all of this, and he retired or resigned from being a U.S. attorney about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I started making a lot of noise about him. I don't know if I had anything to do with his resigning, but on some of the bigger podcasts I've been on, I've pointed him out that he's really been very, very dirty. Anybody who covers up child trafficking, and at this point, there's probably, I think, with Busby's cases, there's probably 20 minors involved. There were, in the first 8 cases, 2 of them were minors that sued Diddy. And then there was the producer, Little Rod, who said that there were always underage girls that were involved with these parties, and that he really had a hard time with that. And then he told Diddy, and Diddy got upset with him, so he kept his mouth shut. But yeah, and that's the other thing with Diddy is there were a lot of minors that were molested by Diddy at all, and those aren't even indictments. And in his case, I mean, he's not indicted with molesting a single minor or trafficking a single minor, which is really a horrific thing.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Nick. I've had 2 witnesses, 2 interviews, I should say, with people that know Diddy very well. One of them who attended at least 3 of these freak-offs that he had. And both of them are claiming that Diddy's been an FBI informant for years. And they said it without a doubt. He's been an informant for years. It makes sense now.
Well, I can give you kind of a history on that. Diddy founded Bad Boy Records with Clive Davis in 1993. Now, Clive Davis, I mean, the criminality that we know about Clive Davis, I mean, this is just what we know. He's been busted 3 times for defrauding the IRS. And when he was the president of CBS Records, he was in the biggest payola scam of all time. And that's where money is given from record companies to DJs and radio stations to play their songs.
Yeah, I remember that.
But then there was a Genovese guy named Pasquale Falcone that got busted smuggling a bunch of heroin into the United States. And the feds started drilling into Falcone, and then they came across all these shell companies that he and Davis had started together. And you want to know how much time Davis did in jail for all that criminality?
Did nothing, right?
He didn't do a single day.
Not a day, yeah.
And you know this. I mean, the only way a guy can be that, can exist with that degree of criminality, the only way that a guy can do that and stay out of jail is he's working with the government. That's the only way. And so, and I'm just kind of extrapolating this, but I think it's a reasonable extrapolation. Diddy and Davis hooked up in 1993, and I think Davis took Diddy by the hand and they started walking on the yellow brick road together. Davis isn't going to go down, but Diddy's going to go down. What Davis has gotten away with is, I mean, he's ripped off so many musicians, and there was actually a documentary made about him that made him look like this benign octogenarian, and but it was essentially an infomercial about Clive Davis. But I think that that's how Diddy got involved in all of this is through Clive Davis.
Well, just so you know, Nick, when I was on the street, Morris Levy, I'm sure you might know that name. He had the Roulette Records at that time. He was associated with us. And I heard a lot of things about Clive Davis back then, and I knew he was, the kind of guy he was. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Clive Davis initially was probably Diddy's protector in all of this because, the thing is, you cannot get away with this stuff for 20 years. And Diddy's been doing this for 20 years. You can't get away with it unless you got some kind of, protection from the government and they're looking the other way. And if they're looking the other way, obviously there's a reason that they're looking the other way. There's no way you get away with this.
And again, with Spence and with Epstein and now with Diddy, there was too much media attention on Diddy. When those lawsuits started coming out and people started reading about the particulars of those lawsuits and how vicious Diddy is and that he was involved with trafficking minors, he could no longer be useful as far as a blackmail artist.
Let me ask you, Nick, if that video didn't come out when he was beating up his girlfriend in the hotel, that seemed to be the trigger. That was like, okay, enough here. And then things really started to get out of hand for him at that point in time. Do you think that was the trigger?
There were a number of lawsuits that were filed at that point by the time that clip came out, but that clip really showed just how vicious he was. And as I said earlier, human traffickers are vicious, whether they're living in a mansion in LA, whether they're living in a mansion on Fifth Avenue like Jeffrey Epstein, or whether they're living in a trailer park. That's like a job requisite is viciousness. You got to be completely soulless.
I'll tell you, this is, in all my years on the street, it's something that I never imagined that things like this were going on. And look, I was involved with some politicians, and I would pay a politician off to get licenses for my gas business so I can be a wholesaler. We did things like that, but I never even envisioned or thought of something at this level until it started coming out with Epstein, honestly. And I don't know what it is with these people in pedophilia and human trafficking. And look, I'm sorry, but we have a president that turns a blind eye to this. He knows that these kids are coming over the border, 300,000 of them missing. We don't hear an outcry or an uproar over any of this. That should be priority. Where are these kids? What's happening with them now? Are they being human trafficked? What's going on? Nobody seems to care about it. There's these private organizations that are coming forward that are trying to do their best to stem the flow of human trafficking. But I don't see the government worrying about it at any level. I don't hear them talking about it. And of course, the media, like you said, they're complicit. They don't talk about it. It's not a big deal. What could be worse? What could be worse than taking advantage of children at that stage of their life? I don't know. And this is just horrible. It really is.
Before I started writing about child trafficking, I wrote a number of things about just the state of American children. And 22% of them are growing up below the poverty threshold. Families with children are the largest growing segment of the homeless population. There's at least, when I wrote the book, there was 10 million uninsured children, but now I think it's down to 2 or 3 million. But obviously, we live in a society that our government says that children are our most precious natural resource, but it doesn't put its money in where its mouth is, and we have to change that. And with Epstein and with Diddy and with the Franklin scandal, I look at that as like the retail destruction of children, and the way that children are being treated now, as far as like below the poverty threshold, and a number of them are dealing with hunger. in the heartland. The statistics are pretty daunting. I think that that's kind of a wholesale destruction of children, and that's something that we're going to have to fix as a society, because when you start superimposing certain trends, there was at the University of Minnesota or University of Michigan, there was a researcher named Dr. Greg Duncan, and he found that if a child grows up with a low birth weight, and is subjected to 5 years of continuous poverty, if they're white, their IQ is going to be 90, and if they're black, their IQ is going to be 85. So Duncan has shown that these kids that are neglected, I mean, by the time they become adults, they're completely out of the game. I mean, the best that they're going to do is find some kind of menial work. And when we neglect child trafficking the way that we've neglected child trafficking, it just shows how other parts of children's welfare we've neglected.
Well, Nick, I can say this, and I've been saying this, for years now. It's the breakup of the family that's really the root problem of all of this in America. I mean, we can't depend upon the government to take care of our kids. Kids born out of wedlock, single family homes. I had experience in prison when a lot of these young kids coming into the system at 21, 22 years old, and every one of them, you can write the same script. They came from a broken home, no father figure in the house. They gravitate to the street, and before you know it, they're in trouble. They have a mom that's young, trying to do her best, and she normally has multiple children, sometimes from different guys. The guys don't take responsibility, so these kids are thrown out in the streets. And the government, they say they care, but like you just said, they don't really care. They don't put resources into them. They're not teaching people the right thing to, hey, you need a solid family life to try to raise these kids, because there's too many distractions in the world today that could lead them in the wrong direction. Until we solve that as a community in America, until we solve that social problem, this is going to continue. But the disgusting thing about all of this is, okay, we know we have that problem, but then to take advantage of these kids and the way that they're doing it is just horrific. And to look, you could kind of understand if they were taking advantage of each other because they grew up this way. But to have high-profile political people, wealthy people in major industries taking advantage of these kids as they do, it's disgusting. I just hope it comes to light. And, the work that you're doing, Nick, to continue to bring it to light is good. And some way, the light goes off and we say, hey, we got to stop this and hold these people that are committing these atrocious crimes, and that's what they are, hold them accountable. And, who knows? I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but, who knows? We got to wait and see what happens with Diddy. We already know what happened with Epstein, but it's a terrible situation.
I think it's going to happen. If I didn't think it was going to happen, I wouldn't have started Epstein Justice. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are dedicated, as I said, to two things. We want the government to tell us why it's aiding and abetted child trafficking, and want the prosecutors or the perpetrators to be prosecuted. Two very simple things. And I think that there's a lot of Americans out there that we're trying to bring together because they're alienated. They do not think that they can have a voice in this unbelievably egregious behavior by the government. But I think enough Americans can come together, because this is so horrific, that we can do something about it. I really do. And I've been at this for quite some time, and I've spoken all around the country. And I think that there's enough people out there that are outraged. I believe that we can triumph. If enough Americans come together on this, we will triumph.
Well, I believe in America. I really do. I believe in people. When they're educated and informed and they know what's going on, that's when they get involved. Unfortunately, like you said, there's a cover up here. They try to minimize it. They try to make it go away. They pull smoke screens over people's eyes. But if they know and they're aware, then they want to help. So, listen, I really applaud what you're doing. We're certainly going to put the link to your organization in there, and we'll get it out there in public as much as we possibly can. I think our viewers will respond to this based upon, the way I've talked about it in the past and the response that I've gotten. So Look, I really appreciate sitting down with you, Nick. I think this will be the first of a few. I'd love to get together with you again. Next time we got to conquer that queso mob thing, because I read that article. Very interesting. You enlightened me about a few things I didn't know. And of course, I knew about the mafia cops and Sammy Gravano's, a relationship that I have now. And Queso always tries to, he tried to take the, I don't know, it should be the credit or the blame for the whole gas scheme. He tried to say that he created it. Absolute nonsense. But I'd love to get into that because my viewers will enjoy that. So we can do that another time.
Yes, that was an investigation. That was another investigation of mine that I interviewed Casso in 1999, and he told me about those cops that were doing hits for him, Eppolito and Caracappa. And I came back to New York City, and at that point, actually, I'd gotten a 302 of Gravano's talking about Casso having the cops and a bunch of other stuff. And I wrote the article about it. Was a men's magazine. They just wanted me to write about hits, but I knew that those cops were guilty. And there was just too much evidence. And no one would touch that article.
Amazing.
And then the cops got indicted, and I was finally able to sell it. But what cracks me up about that, the exact information I had in 2005 when they got indicted, when I sold the article, is the exact information I had in 1999. The only difference was they'd been indicted, so I was able to sell the article.
Amazing. And, even interesting, even though he was an informant for them at a time, when he could have given conflicting information about other witnesses that were cooperating with them, then they threw him to the wolves too. Okay, so it's unbelievable the way this government works. There's no loyalty there. It's all about fulfilling their agenda, and if you don't, no matter who you are, you're dispensable at that point. It's amazing. It's amazing.
With Casso, it's he contradicted Gravano, and Gravano was being used to the feds were going to get John Gotti any way that they could. I mean, Gravano is on record for 19 homicides. I think that there were many more, but to only get 5 years for that really shows how desperate the feds were to get Gotti, that they were willing to make a Faustian pact with Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Well, listen, I don't discount anything that the feds can do. Trust me on that. I've had my experience with them for at least half of my life, and I believe till this moment that they framed my father on a nonsense bank robbery case. I'll take that to my grave. We investigated it later. All the witnesses that testified, they all recanted their testimony. We gave them lie detector tests, told us how the FBI had injected my father's name in this whole thing. So, I don't put anything past them. I really don't. And but this is even, you can almost say this, okay, they were investigating criminals, organized crime, so they moved the goalpost a little bit. Okay, I understand that because we were criminals. But to do this, to cover up, to take advantage of kids like this and to cover it up and to continue in this kind of behavior is just absolutely disgusting. And man, I hope your work, pays off and we get to hold some of these people accountable at least. And I believe this with Maxwell. They must have told her, look, you saw what happened to Epstein. Keep your mouth shut. We'll put you in a cushiony place. Maybe you'll get out a little bit early. Whatever the situation. Just keep your mouth shut if you want to live and have any semblance of a life after this. And that's probably what she did. She got scared and kept her mouth shut because she knows a lot more. She's seen everything. She was his accomplice, a right-hand person. And they cover it up. It's disgusting. But hey, it is what it is. So you continue doing the work that you do. And hopefully more of this will come to light. But I really appreciate sitting down with you, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
And I'll be back to you again.
That sounds good.
All right, my friend. Well, people, I don't know about you. I mean, what more is there to say? What more is there to say? First of all, some of the striking things that Nick said, over 50 million young people have been sexually abused in this country right now, according to the CDC. 50 million, 25% of young girls, and I think he said 6 or 8% of young boys have been sexually abused. And you know why? I said it at the end of the video, I'll say it now. It's all the root problem here, the breakup of the family. That's it. We don't want the government to take care of our kids. But if the government wants to push an agenda where, marriage is not important, where having a two-family, a two-parent home is not important, well, then the burden comes to the government because they caused this in many ways. Look, it's hard to raise children today. It's hard to do it as a single parent. We need two-parent homes. That's it. Now, that doesn't guarantee that everything is going to be wonderful. Of course not. But you're going to have a much better shot. Maybe you're not going to have 50 million children being abused, sexually abused. And most of them guaranteed come from single-parent homes or home where there's not even a marriage involved in any way. Look, some of the things that he said were shocking. The fact that the same U.S. attorney handled Maxwell's case and Epstein's case and Diddy's case, and he just resigned 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is a cover-up. We need to know what went on here. We need to hold these people accountable. Thank God for Nick's work and his foundation that he has that's going to continue to get information on the Epstein case so that we can expose these people. It's so important. We cannot let this continue. We just cannot. Clive Davis, to hear what I just heard about him, it disgusts me, quite honestly. And I heard a lot about him on the street. I did at the time through Morris Levy and a lot of other people that I was involved with at the time. But you know what? To be involved with Diddy, he's Diddy's protector, guaranteed, because he's a powerful guy that has powerful relationships, was probably involved. I'm not going to, I don't have any proof at this point, okay, except that we know his reputation. But if you were involved, you should be ashamed of yourself, Clive Davis. I don't care who you are. You should be ashamed of yourself to allow this kind of behavior to go on. And I'm not saying that he was involved in any of the freak-offs or anything else, but he knew Diddy, and he knows what was going on, and he should have stopped it. That's what he should have done. And again, I want to make this clear. I'm not alleging that he was involved in any of this because I don't know that for a fact. If his name comes out afterwards, it comes out. I don't know it for a fact, and I'm not making that allegation. But he was the mentor to Diddy, and he should have known what Diddy was doing. He knew Diddy. He formed Bad Boy Records with him. He knows him his entire career. And if he knew that this stuff was going on, and I think he had to, he should have put a stop to it because he had that kind of influence. And how did this go on for 20 years with Diddy? 20 years. Because high people are involved. People, that's it. Let's call it what it is. There's no other reason that something can go like this untouched for 20 years. If we were running this operation, forget about it. There would have been a million informants. They would have investigated us. They would have put undercover agents in there. It would have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. If we, La Cosa Nostra was involved in this. But they look the other way because they're involved. Read the book, The Franklin Scandal. Listen to Nick. He's done some other podcasts where more information has come out, where he actually documents things. He does this very meticulously. This is the truth, and people, we need to stop it. Trump has got to hold people accountable. He's got to drain the swamp. That's it. He's got to drain it. We've had stuff going on here in California with the unpreparedness and the just irresponsible nature of our governor and our mayors. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. So people, I can continue, but I've been ranting ever since these fires started. Forgive me, but it's become very personal here because people that I know and love are devastated because of what happened here. And the government in this state could have stopped it, or at least helped so many more people. That's it for today, my friends. How do I always leave you? Same way. Never going to change. Be safe. And that means protect yourself. Be healthy, please. And yes, God bless each and every one of you and your families, your communities, your neighborhoods. God bless America. See you next time.